Last week, we began with the irrevocable bond that the Jewish people have with the land of Israel. How God promises the land of Israel to the Jewish people, beginning with Avraham Avinu, Abraham, our father. Throughout the book of Genesis, we have many reiterations to Avraham, to Yitzchak, to Yaakov, specifically to their children, to Isaac and not to Yishmael, to Jacob and not to Esau, and to his children after him for all time. Despite the fact that we do know the Jews were exiled from their land. And the reality is we talk about how because of our sins we were exiled. Nevertheless, even though we leave the land of Israel is still bound up with us, and how we look to it during our prayers, during our high points and our low points in our life, whether it was marriage or funerals or whatever it may be. We're always looking towards next year in Jerusalem, the high holidays, and other times, Passover. So the Jewish people have always had a connection to the land of Israel we spoke about, and Jews have always migrated there from the diaspora. However, there was not a national movement to return. That began in an expanded way with modern Zionism. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the different ideologies and from where it grew and why there was pushback across the religious spectrum. We're going to try to understand the beginnings of Zionism, of the national movement of the Jewish people in the 19th century, leading to the 20th century, and to get a better grasp of all the different movements that nurture themselves and are nourished knowingly or unknowingly by those battles that took place then. Just to clarify, there were different movements of Jews coming back to the land of Israel to live there, whether it was the Hasidic movement or the students of the Vilna Gaon in the late 1700s. So there were always different movements, and earlier you had among the Hasidei Ashkenaz, there were those that came up. But in general, to create a state and a national movement, that was something new. And we'll understand as we explore a little bit more some of the reasons for the pushback and the evolutions of these movements. So just to begin, there are many different questions, but I would just say from a religious perspective, let's take as a given from what we spoke about last week, the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people for all time and all places, even when they're not there. The land of Israel ultimately will be populated, repopulated fully. The Jewish people will return there, the Beis Hamikdash will be rebuilt, and the Jewish people will have national sovereignty. Traditionally, that was something of the Messianic vision. We will see how some of those elements of the Messianic vision were brought into the secular nationalism in some elements of the early Zionist movement. And so I would just like to begin with, there are different questions that are out there. We're not going to deal with all of them, but it's important to distinguish between the different issues that are at play. So you have the issues of ownership of the land we touched on, return and settling the land, creating an independent state, and then the questions from a religious perspective. What are the religious dimensions of the state? What are the messianic dimensions of the state? What are the roles in protecting the state and its inhabitants? And what is my role as an individual in either return there, or if I am there, supporting the state and its inhabitants, helping it develop? What are the authority of the state versus Torah obligations? And to put it into terms that were used recently, is it a state of the Jews or is it a Jewish state? Is it democratic and Jewish state? Can those things contradict? These are all things that flow out of the different ideologies. So I want to share a screen here that is some basic texts about these issues. So I would say historically, going back to as far back as we can go into the Second Temple period, and according to tradition, that would go back to the giving of the Torah, that the Jewish people are defined by the Torah and mitzvot. Our peoplehood is our religion, although religion is not a good word for us because it is peoplehood. Our very definition of who we are is dependent on the Torah. In other words, the fact that a Jew born of a Jewish mother, not of a Jewish father, or someone who converts to Judaism as part of the Jewish people, that's not ethnic, that's not nationalism, that is a religious definition. Our very being is defined by Torah and mitzvahs. So here's a quote from Saadia Gaon, and this is how it was always understood. Our nation is only a nation by virtue of its Torah. Now, again, there are apologists and revisionists who will go back and try to create national definitions of the Jewish existence, whether it was with Bar Kokhba or the Maccabees or things like that, where there weren't national elements. However, the core of the Jewish people's identity was always Torah mitzvahs, was always the covenant, was always the behavior. And it's important to stress this so we can understand what was the newness and the radical step of what original Zionistic thought was about. Just for example, Passover Seder, we thank God for the birth of our people. We were slaves and God made us free. We are idol worshipers and God drew us near. That's what we thank God for at the Seder. You know, in the Israeli Declaration of Independence, we have our birthplace was here in this land. Part of the narrative of creating this idea of nationalism, which is you are connected to this land from your very beginning, it's who you are. And it's true, God promised the land to the Jewish people for all eternity when Abraham was there, when Isaac was there, when Jacob was there, and his children were there. However, when it comes down to the birth of our people, if we're going to be intellectually honest, it was in the desert of Sinai when we get the Ten Commandments and God communicates the Torah to Moshe, and Moshe communicates it to us. That is the birth of our people. That is our very identity. Okay, so an important element is, if you take a look, it's not race, Jews of all races. It is not our culinary skills. It's not our food. It's not a shared history. Jews don't have a shared history, much of our existence. The Jews of Yemen and the Jews of New York or the Jews of Russia, they didn't share a shared history necessarily. Okay, the Jews of Russia, and many of them migrated to America. But my point is, you had, for thousands of years, you have Jews that lived in different places with very little connection to each other, and their experiences were very different. So in Judaism, what did connect us was always Torah and mitzvahs. For example, the blessings we say on mitzvahs, bless you, Lord our God, King of the universe, sanctified of his commandments. That's the very definition of what it means to be a Jew. Or Asher bachabanu mikol olamim, the blessing on the Torah. You've chosen us from among all nations and given us the Torah. That's our definition. Or in the songs of the holiday prayers. Ata v'chartanu, you have chosen us from among all the nations. You have loved us and found favor with us. You have raised us above all tongues and made us holy through your commandments. You have drawn us near to your service and proclaim your great and holy name upon us. I want to read a letter from the Lubavitcher Rebbe that really illustrates this point. And again, he wrote this in 1957. This does reflect the traditional view, pre-emancipation, pre the creation of these new modern movements that were an attempt to deal with the changing world that was taking place in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, as these different movements began to grow for different reasons, as we'll explore. But the traditional approach of Judaism is an objective, unprejudiced survey of the long history of our people will at once bring to light the fact there was not material wealth nor physical strength which helped us to survive. Even during the most prosperous times under the United Monarchy of King Solomon, the Jewish people and state materially insignificant by comparison with such contemporary world empires as Egypt, Assyria, and Babylonia. It was not stated or homeland is clear from the fact that most of the time, by far, our people possessed no independent state and had lived in the diaspora. If not the language, it's likewise clear from the fact that even in biblical times, Aramaic began to supplant the Holy Tongue as the spoken language. Parts of the scripture, book of Daniel, Ezra, and almost all of our Babylonian Talmud, the Zohar, are written in that language. In the days of Saadia and Maimonides, Arabic was the spoken language of most Jews, and even written. Most of their books were written in Arabic, while later Yiddish and other languages. Nor was there any common secular culture that preserved that people. So that changed radically from one era to another. The one and only common factor which has been present with Jews throughout ages in all lands and in all circumstances is the Torah, mitzvot, which Jews have observed tenaciously in their daily life. To be sure, there arose occasionally dissident groups that attempted to break away from true Judaism, such as idolatry movements during the first Beit HaMikdash and Hellenists during the second, Alexandrian assimilationists, Karaites, but they have disappeared. Considered without prejudice, the Torah and mitzvahs must be recognized as the essential thing, an essential function of our people, whether for the individual Jew or in relation of the Jewish people to humanity as a whole. The secret of our existence is our being a people that dwells alone. Every one of us, man or woman, believing in the one God, leading a life according to the one Torah, which is eternal, unchangeable. Our otherness and independence of thought and conduct are not a weakness, but our strength. Only in this way can we fulfill our function imposed on us by the Creator to be unto God a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, thereby being also a segula for all humanity. That's the Lubavitcher Rebbe's approach. So, in other words, one of the great challenges that people have is trying to pigeonhole what is the Jewish people. For us, it was never a question. Our very definition was Torah and mitzvahs. One interesting thing that we're going to develop a little bit further is that until the 19th century nationalism came along, even those who watered down the tradition still saw themselves as in a religious covenant with God. They may have said, we don't believe in the oral tradition, we only want to keep the prophetic mission, whether the Karaites or the early reforms or whatever it may be. But what happened with the early part of the Zionist movement, it was an attempt to create a whole different definition of a Jew that was not based on the relationship with God and religion. It was a totally new nationalistic approach, just as the nations around them have begun to promote this idea of nationalism, which quickly spread throughout the world, European nationalism and others, and ultimately into other parts of the world as well. So this new definition of what it meant to be a Jew was a revolution that we today are not always aware of because it has become so much part of our daily life. The other issue that we're going to explore, not just the redefinition of Judaism, but in a smaller scale, the changing and subverting, if you will, or adopting and adapting many different Jewish elements, traditional elements, in the service of that, which help blur the lines between what was the initial negative reaction towards it being a whole new definition of Judaism to when elements of Judaism were co-opted into the Zionist movement by well-meaning people and possibly others as well, whether it was the Hebrew language and the land of Israel and the messianic hopes that had permeated all of Jewish life for thousands of years and were central to Judaism. So really there are two separate areas we're going to explore here. I know I'm repeating myself, but just to be able to have clarity. The idea that the original leadership of the Zionist movement initially were motivated by the nationalism of the 19th century in order to normalize what they call the Jewish problem, to fix it. And then in addition, there was a new definition of being a Jew. And then in addition, there were elements where parts of the tradition were co-opted to serve that. And again, that caused pushback as well.
The Lubavitcher movement of Hasidic Jews welcomed Begin when he arrived to visit their leader, Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, late last night.
באתי לביקור אצל הרבי בגלל היותי מזכירו של מנחם בגין. הרבי טען שארץ ישראל שייכת לעם היהודי. התורה צריכה להתחיל במצווה הראשונה. למה נפתח מבראשית ברא ולא מהחודש הזה לכם? שלמען ידעו אומות העולם, שהקדוש ברוך הוא ברא את העולם, הארץ שייכת לקדוש ברוך הוא, וברצונו הוא מחלק אותה. לעם יהודי, לעם ישראל, יותר נכון, הוא נתן את ארץ ישראל, אל הארץ אשר הרקע.
Also der erste Pirisch, die Rasche, hebt sich an der Linie, dass er jetzt selbst ist so. Und gleich der Mund, dass es ein Teil ist.
Die Rasche soll gleich am Hebton lernen mit der Kind bei Komisch der Mikro, im Duber kam er von. Als die Kind brot und hu nossen alle Mische Rotze und dann noch Notlen meher wie nossen Lonu, ist Rebischter und gewollt, dass das, was es einmal geheißen, auf Pitero Nachlass gehen, Eretz, Knaan, aber Mischikowschash Israel durch Manulo, Shal Eretz. Wo das sie gewähnt Jeriche, von Demolton ist Eis Eretz Knaan, sie geworden Eretz Israel. Und was sie geworden Eretz Israel, Min, Hanor, Hagod und Wadna, Harprosh.
נתן תורה ניתנו, והבטוחו שהיא ארץ של בני ישראל במדבר, ילכו לארץ ישראל, ולארץ ותמורת ארץ כנען תהיה ארץ ישראל.
כן התבטא פעם למצווה לישיבת ארץ ישראל, וישיבת ארץ ישראל זה לא רק השטחים של המדינה, כל ארץ ישראל יש לה מצווה לשבת. ויהודים תמיד ישבו בארץ ישראל שזה היה שייך לטורקים, ושייך לאנגלים, ושייך לאחרים. אז הוא חזר כמה פעמים על העניין הזה שישיבת ארץ ישראל, ששקולה כנגד כל המצוות שבתורה, זה גמרא מפורשת אגב. גם מה שלא מדינת ישראל, זה היה לפני 6 הימים, זה ארץ ישראל. גם החלק של ירושלים שלא בידינו, זה גם כירושלים.
Das sie geworden al derich wie a Jerushu und a Matone von der Leibischen, wo das lo adolel me Ilomim, der Chilik ist nur also der Yishveho Oleho oder Yishveho Eile Leyov, שבון גולו מעל שולחן. בשעה גול ישראל מעל אדמות, ist nie der Pshat, das wird zusammengerufen, Eretz Asher. Der Fall wird Asher gewähnt in der Nachlass von der Esser Schwotim, Chas V'Shoven. Das sie gewähnt Eretz Israel demoltechen. Und keinmal nicht Eretz Bovel, zu Eretz Modai, zu Eretz Jovan, zu Eretz Edim, Afal Piva, Sieden seinen Ingolus Bovel, Ingolus Modai, Ingolus Jovan und Ingolus Edim so ist.
כל ההיסטוריה של ישראל הייתה רצופה במלחמות, במאבקים, בהישרדות. והנה שהשם הגדול, הקדוש ברוך הוא עזר, כך הוא אמר, עזר לנו, לעם ישראל. והייתה מלחמת 6 הימים. שחררנו את הארץ בעצם, שחררנו את הארץ. במקום לקבל את הכל באהבה, בשמחה, לדעת להכיר תודה לקדוש ברוך הוא שנתן לנו את כל הארץ הזאת. ועכשיו מדברים להחזיר?
Das kommen nicht, das hat der Rebischter auch getan und hat das auch gegeben, was ist lehem Nachlass Goyim. Jeden sein Aldrufchen Balabatim. will auch geben, ein Stück von der Soll, sie nicht teilen, dass sie los ist lehem, das hat der Rebischter gegeben, als sie war Ayid, kann nicht werden kein Goy. Sie geboren geworden Ayid, hat sie ist der Kol, Yemei Chayo, Biyalma Din und Biyalma Dios. Kann mit Wasser sein, kommt von dort weg. Aber sogar der Fall wird erschienen, Arzeno und Maseno, der Fall der Lied ist weggegangen, befehle schlecht.
הרגשנו שהרבע הזה כואב את הכאב של עם ישראל, את הכאב של ארץ ישראל, והוא ביקש מאיתנו, אנא, תעשו כל אחד בחלקכם, כל אחד בתפקידכם. אתה כמנכ"ל, כמי שמייצג את העדות הדתית בממשלה, תעשו משהו כדי לתקן את המצב, לשנות את המצב, את האווירה בכלל בארץ ישראל.
wo das noch a Golus mar bejeser, als gefindt sich Beretz Asherena Hashem Elokecha, wo Bereich ist Ashono, wie Dach Rishono, und setzt nicht, dass es Eretz Asherena Hashem Elokecha, wo meint, dass es Kegehe Haaros ist, sie zurückkommen noch am Medine, nicht weit von Levonen oder von Yarden oder von Mitzrayim, wie kann jetzt werden.
שתי שגריר פרסים בכל מוקד שארץ ישראל היא ארץ הקדש ונדמנו, וגם פשוט שצריך להשלמות עד ביס משיח צדקנו, ואחר כך ידק משיח צדקנו בכל זה. ותרס אכסיס מביא אליי מיוחס הילין, תחום נמדד ממוקרים שמחשבתי שו. התפילה כשמר נמצא כאן, איסה בביונה שהוא מחשבתי שבארץ ישראל. ודאי במוקרים שמחשבתי שלא נמשום הוא נמצא.
בשעה סעיד זיץ in Chutzloret, hat a Heilig in Eretz Yisrael, Nur wo denn, nur darf man sehen, Jid darf sich sein, wie Gufe Echit in Eretz Yisroel, darf man Wattel sein, die Siebe. Wird bederich me Meile Bottel werden der Misuvo, aber mit me Wattel sein, den Mechato Eino, wird nicht sein, der Misuvo, Golina Marzine, wenn ich sage, Hakel Malad Mafeino.
This is the Kaufman Haggadah. We are distributing it in Israel and outside Israel as well. We are distributing.
being in the outside. I hope to be in the future presented machines to change.
Yes, I hope so.
You'll announce it in Jerusalem first, and I will allow it to be here.
Oh yes, okay. I said.
Very much blessed you.
Okay. So the traditional Jewish approach, the land of Israel is ours and we can't lose it. Even though we could be exiled from it. We say because of our sins, we were exiled. And the traditional approach was that, as we're going to see, that at a certain point in history, we'll go back with the Messiah. Now, individuals have gone back, but what happens with Zionism is something a little bit different that we're going to get to. Or not so different, we're going to get to. But this traditional approach that the land of Israel is ours even when we're exiled. And just like a Jew could convert to another religion and he's still a Jew. You may lose the benefits of membership, but you're still a Jew. Your credit card may still be giving you fines even after you can't use it anymore. A Jew converts, maybe he can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery, but he's still going to be accountable for not keeping kosher. It's not like, oh, I chose not to be Jewish. From a Jewish point of view, you're always a Jew, whether you're a Jew boo or any other type of Jew. You're always a Jew. You can't get away. And the land of Israel is the same way. When the Assyrians conquered it, when the Babylonians conquered it, when the Romans conquered it, and the Jews were in exile in those countries, it was never called Rome. It was called the land of Israel in Jewish consciousness and in the Jewish tradition. Okay, what happens in our history? So take a look. What we're up to, the next stage, is how the world changes. What happens is Napoleon happens. Napoleon brings in this age of emancipation, first for the French Jews, and then German Jews get it, and then Italian Jews get it. And Jews who were once defined by the religion, they are now members of a state. And what they have to do is they have to give up their unique qualities or independence that Jewish people used to have as part of their religion, and they give that up in exchange for becoming part of the secular state. Until then, there was no such thing as this type of equality. But the equality came with a price. So this was emancipation. And at this point, movements developed in Judaism to help Jews make the most of the opportunities, but also to avoid the anti-Semitism that was coming up because the Jews were still different. And because for 2,000 years in Europe, they had been the Christ killers or whatever else the Jews had been, the outsider. And now they're coming in and they're encroaching with they're bursting forth with their pent-up creativity, business acumen, enthusiasm, intelligence on the scene, and they're everywhere. And there's anti-Semitism, there's pushback. So there's different movements in that same time period as emancipation is growing and contracting because there's pushback from nationalists or from anti-Semites and for others. And this is happening in Western Europe. In Eastern Europe, the Tsar never introduced that. He was holding back. He was holding back. The Jews were getting, though, the fruits of emancipation through the Jewish filter called Haskala, which was the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, as it was called, was a period, this is the Age of Reason, the Age of Enlightenment that had happened to the world as a whole that leads to emancipation. So in that following period, you have a century of Jews trying to make it in the secular world without converting to Christianity. In the past, there was a famous line from a Russian Jewish professor who converted to Christianity. They asked him, why do you convert? He said, I converted out of conviction. Out of conviction, it was better to be a professor in university than to teach 4 little kids in my basement. That was my conviction. Now, these are people that weren't able to hold off. That was their ticket into society. However, emancipation brought with it the promise of equality. If we could just do it right, part of the Enlightenment movement that the Jews were promoting was how do we make Jews more part of the larger society? And there were radical assimilationists, and then there were moderate assimilationists or acculturationists, or those who wanted to bring the Jews into the 19th century. So many of them had very good intentions, but what it led to is that they would collaborate with governments, whether the Russian government or other governments, to try to impose what they felt would civilize the Jew and make the Jew lose their distinctive qualities and forms of education and way of life, that they should become Frenchmen of the Mosaic persuasion, Germans of the Israelite persuasion, to be a Yehudi b'veitacha v'adam b'seitacha, to be a Jew at home and a man on the street. Famous story of an English Jew who brought over his grandfather from Eastern Europe, and he wants to make him English. And he has a long black coat, long payas, long beard. This is later in history, this joke, so excuse me, but it works. So he tells him, you have to get a new suit. You can't dress like that. You're not in Poland. Take him and gets a nice Savile Row suit, looking good, gets nice shoes. We got to do something about that beard. And they cut off the beard and his payas, and he begins to weep. And he says, Father, what's the matter? Are you crying about your beard? He goes, no, we lost India. He becomes so British, he was weeping over the loss of India. In other words, the assimilation went so quickly. All right, you had to have been there. All right, the point is that this is what's going on in the Jewish world. And again, in Europe it's different, and what happens is they're always disappointed. They're perpetually disappointed. They think if we just did this, the Gentiles will love us. And then they moved, let's say in Eastern Europe, they became part of the socialists, the revolutionaries. Oh, they're gonna love us. If we're just make all the peasants like them, we're gonna rub shoulders with them. We're no longer, the elite. We're now one of them. No, it didn't work. And as they devolved, their encounter, they kept on trying new things. At the same time, the reform movement in Germany and France began with a two-way door. It was, it started from the people. This wasn't really a top-down, although there were rabbis involved, but there were two issues that the reform movement was struggling with. Number one is, we want to stop Jews exiting Judaism. Therefore, we have to make it more comfortable for them. Again, I'm simplifying here only because I want to show how the reform movement was very antagonistic to the new Zionist movement, just as the Orthodox were, for two different reasons, in some ways similar reasons. So I'm giving an oversimplification of the history, but there are two things. Number one is, for some people, it was to slow down the assimilation. How can I be a Jew in Germany? I have to moderate it. I have to modify. Let's get rid of the tribal elements. Let's get rid of the things that make us distinctive. Jews and pews. It became a copy of the Protestant church in many ways in Germany and in France. And this was for some people though, let's say Mendelssohn, pre-reform, his children convert to Christianity, Felix Mendelssohn. In other words, there was an attempt to stop the hemorrhaging of Jews. It didn't necessarily work because for other people, it became a portal of greater assimilation. So this is the struggle in the 19th century until along comes Zionism. So I want to share a clip from a Reform rabbi in July of this year, June of this year. There was a symposium about some of the issues facing the Reform movement. And this rabbi, Emil Hirsch, was the head of the Reform Zionist organization. And he wrote a wonderful book together with an Orthodox rabbi called One Nation, Two Worlds. And it's about a debate or a discussion about different ways of looking at Judaism, the Reform and the Orthodox. But here he's seeing, this is in July, what is happening in the college campuses and other places where liberal Jews are feeling disconnected from the Jewish peoplehood. Jewish people, the young people are losing it. Let's do a reading, though, before I share the video. This is called number 11. So number 11, I'll just share the screen. Number 11 is Jonathan Sachs. Modernity struck European Jewry with shattering force in the form of civil emancipation. Hitherto, Jews had been excluded from the mainstream of European society. This fact at least served to reinforce Jewish identity. Jews were and were conscious of being a people apart. External circumstances match internal self-definition. Jews, scattered and dispersed, saw themselves as a nation in exile. Their persecution and expulsion, their strange isolation, all served to conform their religious self-understanding. Emancipation changed that fundamentally. The cost of emancipation was that Jews would have to undergo that most characteristic change of modernity, the privatization of faith. Jews would speak, dress, and act like Frenchmen, and would be Jews primarily in the synagogue and home. Jewishness was no longer taken for granted reality and environment. Instead, it was to be highly circumscribed religious confession, confining Judaism into a more restricted space than ever previously occupied in the life of the Jews. It becomes a religion, not a way of life. You become a citizen first and a Jew second. That was the price of emancipation. So here's a Reformed Judaism's platform of 1885. It has changed since then. I'm not trying to pick on Reform because I'm going to pick on the Orthodox just as much. There's a famous line, I don't care which movement you belong to, as long as you're embarrassed by it. Here we are, Reform Movement's Pittsburgh platform. We recognize in the Mosaic, number 14, in the Mosaic legislation, a system of training the Jewish people for its mission during its national life in Palestine, and today we accept as binding only its moral laws and maintain only such ceremonies that elevate and sanctify our lives, but reject all such as are not adapted to the views and habits of modern civilization. We hold that all such Mosaic rabbinic laws as regular diet, priestly purity, and dress originated in ages under the influence of ideas entirely foreign to our present mental and spiritual state. Number 5, I'm skipping a little bit. We recognize in the modern era, hear the messianic tones of early reform, of universal culture of heart and intellect that had such great hopes. Oh, were we all disappointed? The approaching and realization of Israel's great messianic hope for the establishment of the kingdom of truth, justice, and peace among all men. We consider ourselves no longer a nation, but a religious community, and therefore expect neither a return to Palestine, nor a sacrificial worship under the sons of Aaron, nor the restoration of any of the laws concerning the Jewish state. We are not going back to Israel. Berlin is our Jerusalem. This is what they said. Berlin is our Jerusalem, or wherever we live is our land. We are loyal citizens of our land. Okay.
Otherwise, the rifts that emerged between the anti-peoplehood, anti-Zionist Reform Jews of the first half of the 20th century and the Zionists, who were committed to Jewish particularism, will reopen in our movement with devastating consequences for 21st century Reform synagogues. We must develop curricula from early childhood through advanced Jewish studies that instill a love of our people and a commitment to the Jewish state. We've already experienced these ruptures before in our movement. We thought those days were behind us. We were wrong. There is something innate in the philosophy of Western Jewish liberalism that inclines us to elevate universal aspirations not as complementary to or a reflection of Jewish peoplehood, but as its replacement. As stated with breathtaking and radical historical honesty by the founding generation of our movement in the Pittsburgh platform. We recognize in the modern era of universal culture of heart and intellect the approaching realization of Israel's great messianic hope for the establishment of the kingdom of truth, justice, and peace among all men. We consider ourselves no longer a nation, but a religious community, and therefore do not expect a return to Palestine. It dawned on me only a decade or so ago. My close to 35-year career, I only think I figured this out just a decade or so ago, that the anti-peoplehood stance of late 19th to mid-20th century Reform Judaism, the rejection of Jewish particularism in favor of an almost messianic-like embrace of Western universalism, was not an historical aberration. The exception was not the Pittsburgh platform, as I had assumed for most of my career. The exception was the 20th century that inflicted existential threat after existential threat on our people. Eastern European pogroms, Western European fascism, the Holocaust, Israel's War of Independence, the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, the fight for Soviet Jewry. These compelled even fervent anti-peoplehood Reform Jews to warm towards Jewish particularism for a period of time. But now, in an era of no perceived existential threats against the Jewish people, when, if anything, Israel is perceived by many liberal Jews as the neighborhood bully, and notwithstanding the distressing rise of Western anti-Semitism, it's natural, and we should have expected, that this strain of Jewish liberalism that denigrates Jewish particularism would return. Reform Judaism occupies the seam in Western religious life, bridging both the universal and the particular. It's a good place to be. It's where we want to be. But in truth, we have often distorted the balance between Tikkun Olam and Klal Yisrael, thus disfiguring Judaism's unique approach and contribution to the world. We must constantly be on guard and effectively oppose those who would take us back to the future, to the bitter disputes that almost ripped our movement apart in the 20th century. It was only a relative handful, of Reform Zionist rabbis and lay supporters who refused to accept the anti-peoplehood and thus the anti-Zionism of the early 20th century Reform movement. It was just a handful. But they are the ones who eventually reshaped and recharged our movement, and along with it, much of the North American Jewish community. They're the ones we remember. The few in numbers at first, but the mighty in convictions and influence.
That's why I go forward.
They're the ones we study. They're the ones we admire. We name synagogues after them. They knew we had taken a wrong turn. And they fought back with every intellectual and institutional capacity they had. The founder of this synagogue, Rabbi Stephen Wise,
One more piece.
even created a competing liberal seminary right next door in the adjacent building. He called it the Jewish Institute of Religion. That's why we still call our institution the HUCJIO. He created it right next door to counter the then ferocious anti-Zionism of the Hebrew Union College. The same trends, the same fissures, and the same ruptures will reemerge if we are not on our guard and allow Jewish universal aspirations to overwhelm and entomb the theology and reality of the covenant of the Jewish people that lay at the very center of Jewish civilization and religious thought. At no time in the history of our people, was separation from the land of Israel considered permanent. At no time did we abandon the dream of return. At no time in the history of our people did we consider dispersion a blessing. At no time did the rabbis sever Torah from Israel or God from the people. At no time was Tikkun Olam, the universal demand, la'asot tzedakah u'mishpat, to do what is just and right, ripped from the moorings of Klal Yisrael, the centrality of the Jewish people. At no time. It was never one or the other. One without the other diminished both. It was all part of a unified whole. Loyalty to the Jewish people, absent concern for all the families of the earth, is a distortion of Judaism. And Tikkun Olam, divorced from Jewish peoplehood, is not Jewish universalism, it's just universalism. It's more Kant than Kiddushim. It's more Montague than Micah. More John Locke than Jeremiah. More Mill than Malachi. To contend that the Hebrew prophets only cared about repairing the world and not about the well-being of the Jewish people, qua people, is to misunderstand and disfigure the entire prophetic tradition. Judaism absent Jewish peoplehood is not Judaism. It's something else. Whenever Jews abandoned their ideological or practical commitment to Am Yisrael, they eventually drifted away. This was precisely the accusation leveled by Abba Hillel Silver towards his anti-Zionist colleagues in the pre-war years. By continuing to insist that Jews are no longer a nation but a religious community, Silver contended that Reform rabbis were reconstituting Paul's insistence upon a religious creed entirely divorced from nation and land. In a scathing critique, he noted that this declaration of Reform rabbis was the first of its kind ever made by an assembly of Jewish religious leaders, implying that had the Reform movement continued down this path, we too would have eventually drifted away.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify for a second. This shift that Rabbi Hirsch is talking about here is this idea that peoplehood and ethics and universalism they're both needed. Traditional Judaism had something else that was also needed too, Torah and mitzvahs. In other words, to keep the covenant meant not to change the Torah and mitzvahs, but to keep them. Without question, there was that element as well that wasn't ready to be shifted, to be moved in any way. But what happens here is Jewish nationalism, as Zionism, has a completely different take on Judaism. Take a look. I'm going to share. Here we go. This is a little bit of a punch in the gut, I think, for most people when they recognize. Jewish nationalism, Zionism, came up with something new. It was no longer the religion of the Jew that was Judaism. The new way to identify was as a nation state. And it was birthed by, and came into being by the nationalism of the 19th century, that the identity of the people was based on a land and a language and ability to protect those things. That was the original definition. Herzl was a Viennese journalist in France at the time of the Dreyfus Affair. And he witnesses the terrible anti-Semitism after all the progress they made with emancipation and equality, and he's part of the culture. They're going after the Jew as a Jew. And he's like, forget it. This is not natural. We have a problem here. The problem of anti-Semitism. We're not normal. We don't have a state. His first idea, believe it or not, was the only solution he came up with initially. Let's bring all the Jews to the church, have the children convert to Christianity, and the grandparents will die after 120, and Judaism will be no longer. If there are no Jews, there's no anti-Semitism. That didn't take, it took a while. He was totally divorced from Jewish knowledge and Jewish learning, but he loved the Jewish people, and he grew this idea of nationalism, which is, take a look, we'll read this, I'm going to paraphrase, of course. Number 15, he said, we've tried everything. All we want to preserve the faith of our fathers. It's not permitted us. In vain, we are loyal patriots, some are super loyal. We make the same sacrifices. In our native land, we have lived for centuries, still decried as aliens. Over my men whose answer has not yet come at a time when Jews' sides have long been heard in this country. We have to normalize. This was one type of Zionism. It was about, we have to become a nation like all other nations. The reason for anti-Semitism is that we're different. If we were just the same, we tried to be the same, but we're still a people. And since we're still a people, we have to have a land. And this was based on 19th century nationalism. That's what it was coming from. He put it into Jewish garb, not necessarily that well. The Achad Ha'am criticized that if you look at the culture and you read the Alt Neuland, the book by Theodor Herzl, he basically is taking European culture and applying it to this little strip of land in Israel. That's what he knew. And that's what they identified with. So when people, and the reason why I hesitate about this class is when people say, oh, colonizers, European colonizers, there's no question Theodor Herzl's vision was to make a land in the European model. This doesn't take away from our essential bond to the land being ours. But there are elements that we should be aware of, which is what allows people to say what they say when they separate the strands and accentuate certain elements in the arguments or in the literature of Zionism. If we are going to be a nation like all other nations, and we want to be like everyone else, so for the Orthodox Jew in Europe, before Holocaust, once the Holocaust happens and other things happen, everyone changes their mind. Reform changed their mind, Orthodox changed their mind. The whole different conversation, which we'll talk about, God's help, another week. But till in the early stages, this was seen as something that had never happened before. Every group that we mentioned, the Karaites, the Hellenizers, the early Christians, whoever it was, their definition was still one of a religion. For the first time ever, there was a new definition of a Jew, divorced from God, Torah, religion. There may be space for religion in this new place, just like every nation has a religion. But the identity of the Jew has been kidnapped and transformed. It was seen as a greater danger than any of the assimilationist movements because the others just melted into the larger society. This was a redefinition of what it meant to be a Jew. And here are some quotes. Ben Gurion, he says here, we don't have a history since the destruction of the temple. We have histories of persecution, of legal discrimination. This is reading number 16. We do not have Jewish history anymore because the history of a people is only the people created as a whole, a national unit. For the last 1,500 years, been excluded from world history. The last 1,500 years is abnormal. The entire galut is abnormal. The entire Talmud and creative construction of the Jewish people was seen as an aberration because the only true Judaism is a nationalism. It's not a religion. The religion was a placeholder for these. Again, there are different types of Zionists. These are more, we're coming from one side. There are others that critique this, don't get me wrong. And there's religious Zionism. So Zev Jabotinsky, who is the father of what will become the Cherut movement and the more right wing in Israel, but he worshipped Herzl, and he was also an arch secularist, and he used some in his eulogy for Herzl, he uses some very terrible language that would be anti-Semitic if anyone else said it, but I'm going to read it to you. He says here, this is not from the eulogy, the next section, number 17. After removing the dust accumulated through 2,000 years of exile of Galut, with a true authentic Hebrew character reveal its glorious head, only then shall be able to say, this is the typical Hebrew in every sense of the word. Remove the dust of history, our 2,000 years outside the land of Israel, dust, aberration. So for Herzl, he says, our starting point, take the typical Yid of today, and to imagine his diametrical opposite, because the Yid is ugly, sickly, lacks decorum. We shall endow the ideal image of the Hebrew with masculine beauty. The Yid is trodden upon, easily frightened, and therefore the Hebrew ought to be proud and independent. The Yid wants to conceal his identity from strangers, and therefore the Hebrew would look the world straight in his eye and declare, I am a Hebrew. They are the children of the Haskala, of the Enlightenment. They are the great-great-grandchildren. They internalized the anti-Semitism, if you will, of traditional Judaism, of what they had become. And they idolized the Europeans. Herzl was a European aristocracy. How he held himself, how he went to the kings, and he wasn't groveling, he wasn't hiding in corners, he was cultured. This was part of the movement. It was. Now, there's pushback. See, there's a good book. It's called From Herzl to Rabin, The Changing Image of Zionism. So he puts in very stark terms, Amnon Rubinstein. He says, normality meant the redemption of the individual as well as the normalization of the people. The return to Zion is coupled with a metamorphosis of the Jew into a new man. The Jew would become a goy in the double meaning. Goy means a Gentile and a nation. Once this birth takes place, the traumas of the past will be forgotten. To be a guy meant to be healthy nations, healthy people are not obsessed with issues of existence and survival. Ahad Ha'am, who was much more traditional, pushed back at this. And for example, he says here, number 19, I already paraphrased it. He says, you'll find in the Alt Neu land, which means old new land, you'll find, or renewed land, we'll find that in their state, the Jews have nothing renewed nor added anything of their own. Only what they saw fragmented among the enlightened nations of Europe and America, they imitated and put together in the new land. Ahadam said, you guys are wrong. It's not a Jewish problem. It's a Judaism problem. We have to reform Judaism. In other words, you had Zionists that said it is about us becoming normal among the nations. There's another approach which is similar to the other reform movements that existed, that we have to make Israel into a cultural center of a new Judaism that is part of the world, but it is pulling from the roots of Judaism. Again, a form of transformation. And he was flabbergasted that one of the prime Zionist followers of Max Nordau said that in the land of Israel, maybe Sunday will be the Sabbath. He says, not one word escaped the mouth of this Zionist sage which would testify that his heart rebels against the cancellation of the Sabbath. Ahadam said, more than the Jews have kept the Shabbat has kept the Jews. He couldn't understand it. To make it overly simplified, the Eastern European Jews had not gone through the assimilation of the Western European Jews. The Western European Jews were unmoored from the Jewish tradition. They were totally a product of their environment, totally, like the grandchildren of the college kids that we see today. That's what they were, totally unmoored. And then they saw anti-Semitism and they woke up, they wanted to make it normal. But Ahad Ha'am and his followers were part of Eastern European Jewry, although they were also rebelling and trying to find their place, but they were much more connected to their heritage. So the Russian Jews, the Eastern European Jews, were committed to connecting to Judaism. So when an opportunity came to the Uganda plan, which was really in Kenya, to make a national state for the Jews, Herzl was inclined to take it. The Eastern European Jews, the Russian contingent, rebelled. They said, we're not going for that, ever. We need Eretz Yisrael. They merged the hope of the Jews returning to the land with Zionism. But that wasn't all that Zionism was. There were different types of Zionism. There was socialist Zionism. There was, what do you call it, cultural Zionism. There was this anti-Semitism. There was to protect. Some of them wanted to go to Israel without a state. That Herzl wanted to create a whole state with everything the state needs. A full state. Others wanted to go to Israel and be under a British protectorate. It didn't matter to them as much. The reason I'm bringing this up here is that all these elements are still within the different debates that take place in the land of Israel today about, is it a Jewish state or a state for Jews? What is it all about? And this debate continues. Now, one interesting thing, the term Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel, gives it a lifespan of 75 years. It's something new. And then when the Arabs say, you're a European transplant, look at all your works, look at all your writing, they have a critique. And we answer, no, look at the Torah. Before Islam even fantasized about becoming a religion, we were 1,500, 2,000 years in. Don't talk to us about that. But when we call it Medinat Yisrael instead of Eretz Yisrael, we are subtly, language matters in this game. Again, I'm not saying everyone should stop using the word Medinat Yisrael, but I'm saying those who use Eretz Yisrael is to connect to the eternity of the land of Israel, and not this last 75 years with all its issues. Now, the challenge was twofold. Number one was the concept of the ideology of the leadership. But there were religious Zionists. What did they do? Let's take a look at religious Zionism. Let's scroll down. Again, you have to read all these quotes. I just wanted to show, I mean, this is a very strong one. I'll read number 22. Only in the New Age was Judaism revived, but this Judaism stands in full contrast to the Judaism of the Middle Ages, religious Judaism and the Judaism of the diaspora. Zionism truly does uproot religious Judaism from its roots in a more powerful, profound manner than Reform Judaism and assimilation. In creating new characteristics of Judaism, it uproots so they cannot rise again. This idea of a new Jew and a new Judaism as a nationalism was some of the ideas there. Now, the reality is that there were problems in Europe that were beneath the surface that people did not recognize. Now, here's the big question. So the idea that Israel would be more safe for the Jewish people, forget about changing the culture and all that. Is there a place where Jews can be safe? Without question, that became the norm of how Jews viewed the land of Israel and the state of Israel after the Holocaust. Everyone went there because they needed a place to be safe. The irony is the God says that he watches the land of Israel, and people say if Jews would have fled to Israel earlier, Jabotinsky went around saying he sees a fire. He prophesized this, what would happen. Others were not. And he was saying he sees it happening. And they said, oh, if all these Jews, hundreds of thousands, would have gone before the Holocaust, how many more could have been saved? Just as a point of reference, Rommel, the desert fox, was 2 inches away from Israel. It was a miracle he didn't end up there. Sandstorms, different things happened where he stopped. If all the Jews were in Israel, God forbid, it could be just as easy. We couldn't have stood up against the German army, not against Rommel, whatever we have there. Right now, God forbid, I don't want to say the words, but being in one place, does that really make us safer? Come, let's all go together in a tiny land, and then we're going to give $10 billion to Iran to help them make a nuclear bomb. I mean, how does that make us safe? In one place, historically, maybe being scattered is safer. Now, we believe God protects the land of Israel. God protects the Jews. His eyes are always upon it. God will protect us We work with those assumptions. Doesn't mean we don't keep our ammunition dry. We have to. But the argument that it is safer as being a motivation, not great. The idea that we erase anti-Semitism, I don't think so. If anything, Israel's become the Jew. And now every Jew is now identified with Israel. Okay, so I want to take a look, though, at religious Zionism, and then non-Zionism or even anti-Zionism, and then move away from all that and show how we're way past that today, and we don't have to stay. Everyone has evolved. The world has evolved. Things have evolved. There's a difference between the question in the 19th century, should we go make a secular state, to we have a state, should we ensure that it's safe and secure, should we move there, all different questions. Should we protect it? Absolutely. So there's a lot in between, the sandwich, so to speak. Okay, religious Zionism. Religious Zionism were Jews. Anyone want to interject before we go into religious Zionism? All right, I'll jump right in. So religious Zionism.
Rabbi, I just want to say I like the name that you have there.
Which one? Oh, Cook. Very good.
Rabbi Cook.
Very good. His name is, yes, Rabbi Cook was the first chief rabbi of Israel. And he is one of the fathers of religious Zionism. I'm just going to paraphrase, but you can read the text on your own. But what his argument is, it's true that many of the people that came here to work the land were not interested in religion. They weren't interested in God. They were interested in nationalism or protecting the Jewish people or creating a new culture. He says, but there's a spark of holiness. God guided them. We need this as well. He says without their knowledge, they're contributing to the divine scheme and actually committing a great mitzvah. They don't think they're doing a mitzvah. They think they're saving the Jewish people or they're creating a national secular state. But they're doing a mitzvah unaware of themselves. The role of religious Zionists is to help them to establish a Jewish state and turn the religious spark in them into a great light. They should show them that the real source of Zionism, long for Zion, is Judaism, and teach them Torah with love and kindness. In the end, they will understand that the laws of Torah are the key to true harmony and a socialist state, not the Marxist meaning. There will be a light for the nation and salvation to the world. On one foot, Judaism in general believes in earning money in a capitalistic way, but distributing it in the sense of charity and tzedakah and support of others in a socialist way. That you and the community contribute. It's an oversimplification, but it's not one or the other in Judaism. But the point is, a caring, committed, Jewish-based, he believes in this rectification. His critics say, who's using who? Who is using who? When you're going to be forced, because a minority, to do what, if you're in the government, you're signing off on all sorts of things that your conscience doesn't allow you to. You helping create this, you're the fig leaf for all the simple Jews who would never go for the diatribes that we read before coming from those who are anti-religion. What caused the Jews, the Chovei Tzion of Eastern European Jews, the masses, was the fact that it was melded into Judaism. The Hebrew tongue, the Eretz HaKodesh, Lashon HaKodesh, the holy tongue, the holy land. That's what brought them along. So you are a fig leaf for them. This was the challenge. Again, once the state is established, it's a whole different ballgame. Okay. One more quote from religious Zionism. This is from his son, Tzvi Yehuda Kook. He says, we have to realize that our restoration in Israel is not happenstance. It's not a coincidental shaping of history. We must see God's guiding hand and his divine ordering of events for what they are, the fulfillment of when the Lord brings back the captivity of Zion. How fortunate are we to be part of this national rebirth, to be part of the restoration of our life in its original essence. The more we are conscious of the divine, the events of our time, the more we merit to see the Almighty return to his divine presence in Zion. He says, all the wars he says, we're in the midst of a journey. God causes salvation to appear and brings redemption to completion step by step. We must accustom ourselves to gaze in these matters with perfect faith and to trust the redemption of Israel and its unfolding. So I would just say that this seems to be a very beautiful, and it is a very beautiful emotion and a very beautiful way of looking at the world. The one challenge, not the only challenge, but one of the challenges was this idea that was promoted by religious Zionism, that this is the unfolding of the exile. The unfolding of redemption. We are no longer in the Golah, we're no longer in exile, we are now in redemption. And sadly, when there were setbacks and disaster, 1% of the Jews in 1948 are killed in the land of Israel. 1% of the population, 6,000, are killed in that first war. And miracle of miracles keeps us in existence. And all these other things that happen, all the tragedies. This was not the traditional view of Mashiach. This doesn't mean that you can't marshal text. I'm just bringing you perspective of why there were those who did not buy into this being the beginning of redemption. Yes, and open the end of exile. God is knocking at the door. This is a unique gift from God that he gave us the ability to live in the land of Israel, the Holy Land, a place where God is constantly watching, a place where we could be more Jewish. But to be less Jewish in the land of Israel is the opposite of what it's about. Or as we saw in the video, to give away that God gives you as a gift. It's going against that. We're going to talk about the issues of life is in danger, which is an even higher value, of course. But I just want to say, I just want to bring this up so we can understand the crazies on the streets. I know maybe that's not our interest, but when you see people, the Neturei Karta means the guardians of the wall, and a subgroup of the Eideh Charedis, the trembling congregation, or Satmar. These are a subgroup. The people today who are standing there with Palestinian flags have been condemned by even the most radicals that are of the Satmar movement. The Rebbe just said it's a desecration of God's name, what they're doing. They do what they want. They don't listen. They corrupt what was taught to them by their teachers. But where did it come from? Just like we have to understand, where does it come from, the universalism of the college campus kid, which is wearing a talit, Jews for whatever it is, wearing the fetishization of Jewish ritual objects to attack the Jewish people, which has come forth in these protests. Everyone wearing tefillin. I never saw so many people wearing tefillin like at the liberal left protest. Maybe somebody has to show them how to put it on exactly, but it's a beautiful thing. But they're using it. What are they using it for? To show we're not anti-Semitic. We got tefillin. We have a tallis. We're Jews. I always wonder, why don't they march together with the Hamas supporters? Because they can't guarantee their safety. So the Jews are coming together in Times Square, and they're all going to be arrested because we're back to Vietnam. But where is that coming from? It's coming from, and I don't mean to say this in a judgmental way, but the more we adopt the values of the society and we're products of them, we are going to be following them. We're aping them. And 19th century nationalism is also partially an aping of assimilation and acculturation. It was to make a nation like all other nations. It wasn't to be the distinct Jewish nation. It was, we're done. We're joining the family of people. Yay, God, they're going to love us now. Dead silence, right? That didn't happen. My point is that the liberal left, self-hating Jew is also a product, to some degree, of internalizing the values of that which surrounds them and what they've been taught in that cesspool of college, which is being promoted for all different reasons, which I don't want to get into. My point only is to recognize intrinsic Jewish identity to flourish in the land of Israel is intrinsic to its survival. And that is what is, with God's help, happening now. There's a recognition that Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, have a relationship to Torah Yisrael, the religion of Israel, Be'eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel. And really, all the confusion taking place before about these issues. Again, this doesn't mean there can't be disagreement, but a recognition. What are we? Are we Switzerland? Are we Luxembourg in the wrong neighborhood? How do we end up in the Middle East with these neighbors? We ended up, we're trying to be a European nation. But if we're not European, and we're not from the Levant, we're not a neighbor to Egypt and Jordan, we are a godly nation with a godly mission to make this world and the land of Israel a conduit for the divine. And we recognize we are abnormal. The Rebbe asked Rabin, maybe I was going to show that video, but Rabin was very secular, kibbutznik, really secular, and he came to the Rebbe. They would come when they were the different ambassadors. And he came to the Rebbe, and he said he had a long talk with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe had this conversation with him. Balaam, the Gentile prophet, says about the Jewish people, Am levadad yishkon, a nation that dwells alone. He says to Rabin, do you think this is a curse or also a blessing? Is it just because of anti-Semitism, and if they would love us, we'd be able to be part of it? Or is there something of value by being distinct and different? And Rabin said, I saw it. I saw there is. It's not just a curse. I heard where he was coming from. This shift that has to take place, with God's help, I've never seen, again, maybe I don't agree with all the tactics, but the confidence to not take the UN garbage sitting down by condemning them for their behavior in every public forum, where it's like, I'm not going to be answerable to you, not to you, Erdogan, and not to you. I'm not taking rebuke from you. That sort of confidence. Again, you don't have to, we have in the Torah the mitzvah, don't start up even with a little nation. We're not trying to stick our finger in. We have to be careful not to stick our finger in, but to stand in someone's eye, but to stand up with confidence and to speak the truth and not be intimidated by everyone standing around 140 members telling you you're a murderer, you're a murderer. And we have to sit there and think, they're speaking with confidence and they're condemning and they're standing up in a very strong way. I want to go, though, to the traditional views, and this will help us understand where these Neturei character people came from. Again, they are not part of they have collaborated with the terrorists and with the enemies of the Jewish people, and that is worse than an apostate or equal to an apostate. In other words, when a person converts to Judaism, there are two things we ask them. You know that you're going to suffer and be persecuted as a Jew. Do you want to be part of the Jewish people? Yes. Do you want to accept the whole Torah? Everything? Yes. They have to accept two things. My people are your people and your God is my God. To be a Jew, when we say the wicked son in the Haggadah, what does he say? He says, what is his service to you? And we say, because he has cut himself off, because he has denied that which is fundamental, which literally means he denied God, therefore, because he's denied that was fundamental, therefore he's denying God. What we're saying there is, if someone denies being part of the Jewish people, that is a form of cutting yourself off. Again, you're still a Jew, but to recognize these people are outside the norm, even for the radicals. But where do these radicals come from? I want to give you three approaches in traditional Judaism. Approach number one, religious Zionism. The state of Israel is the messianic redemption unfolding little by little. Kima, like a sunrise, bit by bit. The challenge they had, and a great cognitive dissonance, was with the Gaza withdrawal. When they saw where God prophesies, when the Mashiach will come, you'll never be pushed off your land, and they saw the state itself kicking them off the land for some fantasy, they were broken, because they saw these are the most committed people, put their life on the line, and they were treated like garbage. They never were even resettled in a normal way, living in disaster. And then Sharon, whatever his plan was, has a stroke. So nobody even knows what his plan was. He never even expressed it. Disaster. And many of them lost faith in the state of Israel. Many of them. So the challenge for religious Zionism has been this idea. Number one is all the death and suffering that we've undergone. Can you call that Messiah? Stop. That's not what Messiah is. It might be getting ready for the Messiah. That's the critique. I'm giving you a critique. So the religious Zionist, though, is the footsteps of Messiah. Then the other extreme is these people who are let's call the Satmar approach, not the crazies yet, who say that the Jewish people are supposed to be a nation that is not independent until the Messiah comes. Messiah will be the king. Until that happens, we shouldn't be independent. Let the British have a mandate. Let the UN run it. Now, the critique of that is, just from a Jewish law point of view, if they're right or wrong, but you cannot defend Jewish life with a British mandate, nor the UN. We would be all barbecue, God forbid, if you rely on the UN. Please, you have to. So that's the critique. Even if they have this idealistic view that really we should never have shifted from the definition of the Jew. And there's a middle road. The middle road is God's miracles that brought us to the land of Israel. It's an opportunity for us. It is as if we are given this ability to protect ourselves, to raise up a culture that is a Jewish culture of Torah, mitzvot, land, and peoplehood. It's an opportunity. And God keeps on showering miracles on us and gifts. Will we be worthy? So that is that's the middle road. That was very much the Rebbe's approach. And I do believe that approach allows for all the different groups to come together, because we're there right now. This is where the Jewish people are. The survival of the Holocaust that the Reform Rabbi was talking about, the close call of survival of the people that caused everyone to recognize that peoplehood is important. Right now, we are in a place where that survival of Jews is important. The land of Israel has to protect itself. But not just that, we are one. More than just that, we care for each other. More than just that, this is who we are. Jewishness, the land of Israel, Torah of Israel, the God of Israel, it's all intertwined. With God's help, that will be. I'm not sure if it will last. God's help, it should last. But this is the path that many seem to be on, that I'm picking up, and with God's help will continue. So my point is, reality has a way of changing ideologies. Everyone has morphed for the last 75 years. These ideologies that I presented here in the radical form were changing day after day. So it's not fair to judge them now by those ideologies, because they've all changed. Everyone has morphed. Everyone has. But can we find these strands to build it on? So I just want to go, just to conclude, with the traditional view of Mashiach and then open up for questions. I'm not going to read it all, but it's in your booklet. So there is a terrible, in 28, is a quote from the Talmud. It's debatable if it's law. I just want to give one quick, these are one of the texts that do come up. I probably shouldn't even bring it up, but the text basically says that God made a vow with the Jewish people, that they would not go up in force to the land of Israel, they would not rebel against the nations, and that the nations would not persecute them too much. And therefore the Jews are supposed to stay in exile and not revolt against the nations. So some people saw this as a proof that one should not lead a national liberation movement to take over Israel. Others said that, who says this is the law? It's a Talmudic quote. And it's not necessarily, it's not brought down in codes of Jewish law. So just because it's in the Talmud, there are lots of stories. Number two is, they say this condition that the Gentiles shouldn't persecute us too much was a dependent condition. As soon as they persecuted us too much, we're allowed to go up to the land of Israel. Number three, they said, the nations didn't let us go. Never before has there been a UN and the League of Nations and everyone else that allowed us, and England, who was ruling at the time. We got all the permission, so it's not rebelling. So there are all these different responses, but I'm bringing it up because you'll see it quoted sometimes by the radicals. And not just that, once we're there, even if they're right, here's the point. Once we're in the land of Israel, okay, I'm gonna say something radical. The land of Israel belongs to us. Mashiach's gonna come and it'll all be perfect. Even if you tell me that it was conceived in sin, the state, that we shouldn't have gone up, we should have stayed in exile. Even if you argue with that, once we're in the land of Israel, we have an obligation to protect and defend ourselves, which is what we're going to talk about next week. In other words, just because someone may have done something that didn't fit exactly into your narrative, how it should have been, and even if you're right, doesn't take away that it changed reality. Don't be a fool and say, oh, all the Jews should go to Boca. All the 7 million Jews should move to America. First, you're not going to be safer there. No, we see that. We don't know what will happen tomorrow. Morgan and the free. You know, you ask when there could be another Holocaust, God forbid. Morgan and the free, God forbid. In other words, based on the reality of our world, we see the changing of the world can change in minutes. So we have the land. The land was ours and is ours. Should we have made a secular state? Okay, religious Jews can debate that. That's a theoretical question. Right now, everyone believes the land of Israel is ours. We have to protect the land. So those two things sandwich everything. I just want to conclude with the Maimonides. The book of Deuteronomy, it says, God prophesizes at the end of Devarim, reading 29. He says here, you're going to be exiled from the land and you will return. He says here, God has banished you in verse 1, and you'll return with all your heart, and God will bring your exiles back. The traditional approach was the Mashiach would come when Jews repented. The fact that now we have an opportunity to be in the land of Israel with almost half of the Jewish people already in the land of Israel is a tremendous miracle. Okay, but is it redemption? Religious Zionists would say yes. Others would say it's an opportunity. And this is a foretaste. Again, I'm not getting into right or wrong here. I want to just give different perspectives and show how the unity of where everyone can agree, there's so much there as well, despite the conflicts of the past that led to the conflicts of the present. And then Maimonides prophet says that the prophets say that the moment we repent, we'll be redeemed. So it's not going to be, in other words, this incremental growth of slowly spending, 50, 75, 100 years of redemption. Redemption is going to come like that. Any moment it will come from God. Of course, we have to do what we can to prepare the world, prepare ourselves, and things like that. And here's Maimonides, which also, Laws of Kings. The Messiah will come to renew the Davidic dynasty. He'll build the temple and then gather the dispersed of Israel. And all the commandments will come back to the way they once were. And he quotes the same verse in Deuteronomy. And he says, what does he have to do? Let's read number 4, and then we'll open to questions. If a king will arise from the house of David, who diligently contemplates the Torah and observes its mitzvot as prescribed by the written and oral law as David, and will compel all of Israel to walk in the ways of Torah and rectify the breaches of its observance and fight the wars of God, we may with assurance consider him the Messiah. If he succeeds, builds the temple, gathers this verse, he's definitely the Messiah. According to Maimonides, you can have potential messiahs that do most of the job and then fail. But the point only is, is that return to Judaism is part and parcel in the Jewish vision, traditionally, of Messiah. So I just wanted to, so these are the three approaches in the religious world. In the religious world, the three approaches were, it is the it is the beginning of redemption, the beginning of the flowering of redemption, and the other extreme saying, no, 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 it's a bad thing because you're trying to be like all the other nations and you're forcing yourself into history. All the things that the secular Zionists said, they were jumping on without anything in between either. They were buying that too. And then you have something which is the highway in the middle. Is my argument, the highway that is broader and broader every day, which is the land of Israel is a gift from God, a miracle from God. But as Jews, we have to act Jewish. If you're chosen, act it. This is the approach that I do believe has the ability to unify us, and I believe is happening, and what God told me should continue. Any thoughts on my radical taking out all of our skeletons out of our closet? I have to be honest. Yes, Mrs. Levchenko.
So I was at the March for Israel yesterday.
Who did you meet there?
Your son, Shmuel.
Shmuel, the lost son.
3,000 people.
300,000 people. And you found Shmuel?
Twice.
And he put on tefillin with David?
David.
And some other people I saw there.
Yes.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And what were your thoughts when you were there?
Well, that's not my question, but
okay.
You want me to?
No, tell me the question better.
No, I just want to say that, it was amazing in the sense that two things, real quick. One thing is, I shared some pics and short videos from the rally with my friends and family in Israel. And the reaction they got, I mean, obviously, I knew they would be happy, right? But they were so appreciative and so, almost like moved by this.
We have not been forgotten. 300,000 Jews showed up on a weekday.
Yeah,
how alone they felt. You didn't realize how alone they felt.
I didn't realize because we feel terrified and scared here, but I didn't realize how should they be feeling there.
Right.
They probably feel like they're there in a small place and the whole world, against them. So it was, a kind of eye-opening for me to see how appreciative they were that they saw thousands and thousands of people actually there on their side.
Right. Because instead of watching on TV all the different protests against them, and the world hates me.
Right.
Okay,
good. The second thing was, probably it's gonna sound like a cliche, but there were people from all over, people.
Right.
Young, old, different. There was some crazy political sides, but very, very few. The overall thing was everybody was, bring back the hostages. Israel has the right to exist and defend itself. Fight anti-Semitism.
Right.
Everybody.
And you can't censor everybody. I can hardly censor myself.
No, but I'm saying it was amazing to see that you could see people were like, liberal, conservative, whatever. But it was nice to see that for half a day, people actually realized that we're all Jews and we're
in this together. Right.
Yes.
Right.
And my question was that at the same time there was a group of very observant Jews
looking
on the side, with the signs saying Judaism rejects.
Right, those are the people I'm talking about. They're called the Turei Karta. So these are the people that say they're a subgroup of a subgroup of a subgroup of radical Jews. They're not accepted by their own people. They're called, no one lets them into the synagogues or into the schools. They marry each other. They marry cousins. There's like 3 large families in Antwerp and England because no one has anything to do with them. And in New York, these 3 large families, because they are seen as being capos. They're seen as going over to support the enemies. But they're subgroup of Satmar. Even Satmar is embarrassed of them. In other words, the Satmar and the Turei Karta, are the radicals. These are the radicals of the radicals. Okay, that are totally. And their point is what they basically say is that the land of that Messiah can't come until we are in exile outside the land of Israel. That was what it was supposed to be. They say this was an aberration. This was a revolt against God. But it's a total corruption of this idea, just like the liberals who are saying kill the Jews is a corruption of what it means to be a liberal. My point is just because they wear the funny hats and they have long beards, doesn't make that pay us the whole work. That's the whole point. That's what they're doing. Oh, look, the religious Jews. It's something where it's a cult, and it stemmed from the Satmars did believe that the secular state of Israel was going against God's will, and they believed we should have stayed in exile. Okay, and they did believe that. There were groups like that. And for sure, this existed before the state. When you read what the secular Zionists said, what the state is going to be, you could understand why those people who are connected to Judaism saw this as a revolt against Judaism and against everything. Again, but it devolved into something much more pathetic and much sadder and much more uglier, to what has become. And it has to be rejected. I mean, that's the whole point. They go there, with the Palestinian flag and all that. Okay, so Karen, yes, redemption, Messiah, all the same thing that usher in an era of peace and redemption. A King Mashiach, a human being, will build the temple and gather the Jews, and then usher in that time. It is the same thing, correct?
Because Rabbi, because why did you say that it wouldn't be a good thing, unless if I didn't understand?
What wouldn't be a good thing?
What you said, like on one hand, I think you said something like on one hand you would want the Mashiach, the Messiah, to come, but then it means that, I don't know, you said a lot.
No, clarify. What I was saying was the religious Zionists were saying that the last 75 years have been in the age of Messiah. We're no longer in exile. We're moving in the age of Messiah. What that means exactly in different times, in 1967, when they saw the open miracles, it became much stronger that we're in the age of Messiah. The Rebbe's approach is that we are on the cusp of Messiah, but when Messiah will come, there'll be no more death, no more suffering. All those things are going to end, and therefore we're not there yet. And don't call it that because it's mixing it up. It's not a huge deal. I don't want to make a bigger deal out of it. I just want to give the perspectives. Sorry, Amen.
Really wonderful. Thank you for doing this. And it's really helpful to understand all the different intricacies and the thought processes that led to Jewish thinking today. Right? But I noticed it's in the Rambam, War of the Kings, he specifically says, he's one person, but he says, if the king arises and this happens, he's assuming that it may take a few people, or not, maybe many people, who are getting a little bit closer, but not quite there, not quite able to.
Correct, that's all before, right?
So he's in a sense saying, yes, there is a process.
Oh, absolutely. So in other words, right. So in other words, the sudden thing would be, not the sudden, in other words, what you have is, you have a potential Messiah. Like he gives Bar Kokhba as an example. That's why Maimonides quotes the story of Bar Kokhba, who's fighting the Romans, and he's trying to bring back the temple and all that. And he sees him as a failed Messiah, not a false Messiah. But it's not redemption. The personhood of Messiah is going to do these things. The Geula, the redemption, is not here until the temple is built and all the Jews come back. That's the understanding. Now, I just want to clarify that there were religious Zionists who said that the natural approach of Maimonides can now be applied to a natural other formats of things. So that becomes a question. And really what it comes down to is, what is the difference? Tell me the difference between the end of exile and the beginning of Messiah, what it looks like, and what is the danger of calling it Messiah when people are dying and being killed. That is the critique of it. In other words, let's say we can debate this, but where are you coming from? Was there a prophet that said this? No, it's an interpretation right now, which has had lots of setbacks, and there's lots of tragedy. So in other words, fundamentally, I believe the religious Zionist movement has modified based on, just like we all modified based on what happened in the Holocaust and persecution in Europe when we come to Israel. There's been a modification, I believe, in the idea that we're on this upward trajectory without any sort of, detours of in the redemption, no longer in the exile. In other words, God forbid, could something have happened that would exile us from the land in this narrative now, today, from the religious Zionist point of view, when they saw all the failures that with free choice, the Israeli government made all sorts of failures and mistakes or whatever it is that leads to disaster. So others would say this doesn't fit with the narrative of what we call Messiah. It may be the birth pangs of Messiah. It may be the tsaris, the suffering that comes before. This may be Armageddon, God forbid, before. With God's help, we fulfilled all that in World War II, World War I. But those are the birth pangs of, they are not redemption. It's semantics, and that was just the critique of it, is that don't get comfortable, so to speak, that we're on this trajectory, that no matter what people are doing, we're going to the Messiah. Messiah is related to us getting on board and hastening it by behaving in the proper manner.
Yes, exactly. I'm not saying anything to do with the Messiah, but
Right.
because he allows the potential Messiah to fail.
Correct. That means it's not redemption yet.
That means not redemption.
But when is it not redemption? When is it no longer exile? At what point? As soon as the temple is built and the Jews all come back.
Right.
That's the argument.
Prior to what I'm suggesting.
Right.
Even prior, maybe that's what you said. Even prior to the king who will arise from the house of David, there's
activity.
Phases that
correct.
Are successful or not successful.
Correct. And we call that the end of exile. That's a different. Again, this is semantics and really, but the idea that we still are praying for the redemption and that we still are suffering in exile, and we should not make ourselves comfortable with this, which leads into some other areas as well. We should, but that's the core. And I really think that in so many ways, many of these differences have become less important because we're saying this, we begin to say the same thing. We recognize that our free choice can cause disaster, God forbid, for the Jewish people, despite the fact that we believe God protects us miraculously from all the bad choices we made. Next week, we'll talk about all the times Jews tried to give way, not just Gaza, but the West Bank and Jerusalem and Hebron and all sorts of things. We tried to throw it at them, and it would have been disaster upon disaster upon disaster. And miraculously, the Arabs didn't accept it. If they would have accepted it and they would have pretended a little bit longer, God forbid, what could have happened? In other words, we recognize miracles, we recognize God is watching us, but we take responsibility for our moral choices and our leadership's moral choices. It's important. And the reality is that they have not been able to police the area because of their withdrawal from the area.
Who's not able?
Israel has not been able to police Gaza.
Oh,
Because they withdrew.
The point was that they didn't want to police.
I know they didn't want to, but what did they think would happen there? They bought into a narrative that they would be able to go in and take care of any problems. And then when it became too expensive for loss of life, for keeping going in and cutting the grass, when they kidnapped soldiers and things like that, they bought into a new narrative, which was Hamas wants to run a state, not kill all Jews. Now it's pretty clear that Hamas wants to kill all Jews, and even if you give them 5 states, it's not enough. They want a caliphate. They don't want and they don't want one state. That's the greatest myth of all. The problem is many Jews in America today are mourning not just for the loss of what's happening, but their loss of faith in this 2-state solution.
They just want one state without the Jews.
No, they don't. Hamas says clearly they want a caliphate. They don't care about a state. They don't mind. They say it's about it's like ISIS. You read their stuff. They're clear. In other words, the Palestinian Authority, here's the reality. If you look around all the failed states of the Middle East, who wants a state? You have an empire that Turkey wants. You have an empire the Ottoman Empire they want. Or you have a Shiite caliphate or a Sunni caliphate by ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Hamas and all those people. None of them are looking for a nation state. Nation states are so passé. Who's into that 19th century nonsense? Only the Palestinians when they talk to the Jews. But when they talk to everyone else, we're gonna have a caliphate. Who needs a little bit of seashore in Tel Aviv? We're gonna conquer the world. France is next. England is next. That's what they say, the Wahhabi and Sunni radicals. That's what they're saying. It's not a state. This is the biggest myth. We're bought into statehood when the only states in the Middle East are failing states or failed states. I mean, it's a nonsense. And we're bought into it. We're stuck in this rat trap. Talking about rat trap. We're stuck in the rat trap. Oh, you want a state? Oh, you're going to be so nice to us when you have a state, won't you? Once they have a state, the Salafis and the Wahhabis and the Shiites are going to kill each other like Iraq, and then spill over into Syria like they did, and then spill over to us. There's the only way. Okay, we're going to talk about it next week. But in other words, what has happened over the last 25 years, 30 years, since the 1970s, 50 years of the change from nationalism to Islamic fundamentalism has changed the entire idea. Even when it was nationalism, with Egypt, he wanted to have a pan-Arab state. And he wanted to rule the whole empire, just like the Turks did. So there are changes. The question becomes really, I'm not talking about the holiness of the land. Tomorrow next week, we'll talk about what are the obligations to protect life and how does one make decisions about when an army should retreat? When should a nation retreat in order to have peace or security? This is not a death wish. You know, what are the rules of war, so to speak, and what are the rules of peace, and what are the rules of how we defend ourselves in general, and about what are the parameters of holding on to the land of Israel, or giving up pieces of the land of Israel from a Torah viewpoint that puts sanctity of life above sanctity of Jerusalem, above sanctity of the temple, sanctity of life. What will protect and defend? This is what we're going to talk about next week, as well as the balance. If you go to war, if you're allowed to go to war to conquer a land, that means life is going to be put at risk. So we have to talk about what are these mitzvot of conquering land, defending land, settling land, and most importantly, saving life, which is going to be the core thing. And we'll look at the different peace treaties and divisions of the land of Israel that has taken place over the last century as well. Thank you all.